The old maple tree stood sentinel at the edge of Willow Creek Farm, its branches reaching skyward like weathered hands in prayer. For 35 years, it had been Mason Taylor's guidepost, a symbol of home and heritage that had anchored 5 generations of Taylors to this fertile corner of Vermont. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But today, as Mason slid beneath a customer's rusted pickup, in his makeshift garage, that maple existed only in memory. 8 years ago, the bank had foreclosed on his family's 200-acre legacy after a series of crushing medical bills and failed harvests. Now, at 43, the former farmer scraped by as a small-town mechanic, raising his 12-year-old daughter Abby in a modest rental on the outskirts of Riverdale. Mason had no way of knowing that fate was about to connect him with someone who would change everything, someone whose arrival would unearth long-buried family secrets and offer an unexpected path back to what was lost. All it would take was one chance encounter, one luxury SUV with engine trouble, and one very pregnant woman with a surprising connection to his past. The first hint of autumn had begun to color the Vermont countryside, painting the hills in splashes of amber and gold. Mason Taylor wiped the grease from his hands with a shop rag that had seen better days and glanced at the wall clock. Almost 6. He'd promised Abby they would have dinner together tonight, a rare treat given his usual late hours keeping Taylor's auto repair afloat. "Last one for today, Rick," Mason called to his lone employee, a lanky 20-something who had a natural talent with engines but struggled with punctuality. "Lock up when you finish with the Johnson minivan." "You got it, boss," Rick replied, his voice muffled from underneath the vehicle. "Tell the kiddo I said hey." Mason smiled. In the 3 years since he'd opened this place, in an abandoned gas station on Route 7, Rick Dawson had become something like family. The kid reminded Mason of himself at that age, before responsibility and hardship had etched permanent worry. Lines across his forehead. "Will do," Mason said, hanging his blue work shirt on the wall hook. He was halfway to his battered pickup when he heard the distinctive sound of an expensive engine struggling. The black Range Rover limped into his lot, smoke billowing from under the hood in concerning grey clouds. Mason sighed, glancing at his watch. Abby would understand. She always did, showing maturity beyond her years, a trait she'd developed after losing her mother to cancer when she was just 4. The Range Rover's engine died completely as it rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened, and Mason felt his breath catch as a very pregnant woman eased herself out, one hand supporting her lower back. She wore designer jeans, leather boots that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and a cashmere sweater that hugged her baby bump. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a face that looked both exhausted and determined. "Please, and tell me you're still open," she said, her voice carrying a hint of desperation beneath its polished tone. Mason walked toward her, professional mode engaging automatically. "Just about to close, but I can take a look. Having trouble with your engine?" "You could say that," she offered a tired smile. "It started making this terrible knocking sound about 10 miles back. Then the smoke started." She extended her hand. "I'm Charlotte Westbrook." "Mason Taylor," he replied, shaking her hand. "Pop the hood and I'll see what we're dealing with." As he suspected, the Range Rover had suffered a serious coolant leak that had led to overheating. The engine would need significant work, parts that his small shop didn't have on hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Westbrook, but this isn't a quick fix. The head gasket's blown, and there might be damage to the cylinder head. I'd need to order parts, and they wouldn't arrive until Monday at the earliest." Charlotte's shoulders slumped. "Perfect. Just perfect." She blinked rapidly, and Mason recognized the look of someone fighting back tears. "I'm supposed to meet with my lawyer in Burlington tomorrow morning. It's important, about my grandfather's estate." Mason glanced at her pronounced baby bump. "How far along are you?" 34 weeks, she replied, absent-mindedly rubbing her belly. "Doctor says everything looks good, but I shouldn't be stressed." A humorless laugh escaped her. "That ship has sailed." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange and purple. Mason knew what he should do. Call her. A tow truck. Recommend the dealership in Burlington. And get home to Abby. But something about Charlotte Westbrook's situation tugged at him. "Listen, there's a decent motel about half a mile up the road. I can give you a ride there, and you can arrange for a rental car in the morning. Burlington's only about an hour from here." "Thank you," Charlotte said, relief evident in her voice. "I really appreciate it. My phone's about to die, and I don't know anyone in this area." "Just passing through?" Mason asked, leading her to his truck. "Sort of." Charlotte hesitated. "My grandfather passed away 3 months ago. He owned property around here that I never knew about until the will was read. I've been in Boston handling his main estate, but apparently there's some land here that he left to me specifically." Mason helped her into the passenger seat of his truck, noting how out of place she looked in the worn interior. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's been complicated. We weren't close. I barely knew him, honestly. He and my father had a falling out before I was born." Mason started the engine, which coughed to life reluctantly. "Family can be complicated." "Tell me about it," Charlotte murmured, resting her hand on her stomach. "That's why I'm determined to do better with this little one." As they pulled onto the main road, Mason's phone rang. Abby's school picture flashed on the screen. He tapped the speaker button. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm running a bit late." "Dad? We still having spaghetti night?" His daughter's voice filled the cab, sounding both hopeful and doubtful. "Absolutely," Mason assured her. "I'm just helping someone with car trouble. I'll be home in about 20 minutes, okay?" "Okay," Abby replied, the smile evident in her voice. "Can I start the sauce?" "Sure thing. Just be careful with the stove." "Dad, I'm almost 13. I know how to use the stove," Mason chuckled. "Right, sorry. See you soon, kiddo." After he hung up, Charlotte gave him an appraising look. "Single dad?" Mason nodded. "Her mum passed when she was little. It's been just the two of us for 8 years now." "That can't be easy." "We manage." Mason turned onto the street where the Riverdale Inn stood, its neon vacancy sign flickering in the twilight. Some days are harder than others. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "My husband left when I told him I was pregnant," she said suddenly. "Said he wasn't in that phase of life yet." She made air quotes with her fingers. "So I get it. The whole single-parent thing. I'm about to join the club." Mason pulled into the motel parking lot and turned to face her. There was something about Charlotte Westbrook that didn't quite match her polished exterior. A vulnerability that resonated with him. "The inn's not fancy, but it's clean," he said. "Mrs. Harding runs it. Tell her Mason sent you, and she'll take good care of you." "Thank you," Charlotte replied. Then she bit her lip. "I know this is probably imposing, but would you mind if I borrowed your phone to call my lawyer, just to let him know I might be delayed?" "Of course." Mason handed her his phone, watching as she dialed and waited. "James, it's Charlotte." "Yes, I'm fine, but I've had some car trouble." "No, I'm in Riverdale. A mechanic is looking at it, but it won't be fixed by morning. I know it's important. That's why I drove up today instead of waiting. Can we push it to the afternoon?" 2 o'clock works. The property inspection can wait until after, I suppose. "Yes, grandfather's farm. Apparently it's been in the family for generations, though why he left it specifically to me is beyond understanding." "Yes, Willow Creek Farm. That's what the will said." Mason froze, his hand gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Willow Creek Farm. His family's farm, the 200 acres that had been foreclosed on 8 years ago after his father's death, left them drowning in debt. Charlotte finished her call and handed the phone back, seemingly unaware of Mason's shock. "Thanks again. My lawyer can push the meeting to tomorrow afternoon, so at least that's handled." Mason cleared his throat, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Did you say Willow Creek Farm?" Charlotte nodded. "Yes. Have you heard of it? Apparently, my grandfather purchased it years ago as an investment. My lawyer says it's been sitting vacant for a while now." The pieces started falling into place in Mason's mind. 8 years ago, after the foreclosure, the farm had been purchased by a private investor. Mason had tried to find out who had bought his family's legacy, but the transaction had been handled through layers of LLCs and corporate entities. All he knew was that the new owner had never moved in, never farmed the land, and had let the old farmhouse stand empty, a ghost of what once was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I know it," Mason said carefully. "It was my family's farm for 5 generations before we lost it in foreclosure." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." Mason ran a hand through his hair. "My father died, leaving massive medical debts. Then a drought hit, and we couldn't make the mortgage payments. The bank took everything, and my grandfather bought it," Charlotte said softly, the realization dawning on her face. "Mason, I had no idea." "How could you?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, let me help you check in, and then I really need to get home to Abby." The mention of his daughter seemed to trigger something in Charlotte. She placed her hand on his arm. "Wait, please. I know this is bizarre, but I think we need to talk more about this. Would you and your daughter like to have breakfast with me tomorrow? I feel like there's more to this story than either of us understands." Mason should have said no, should have politely declined and gone back to his life, the life he'd rebuilt from the ashes of his family's legacy. But curiosity and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope, made him nod. "Mrs. Harding's place serves a decent breakfast starting at 7. 7 it is." Charlotte smiled, and for the first time, Mason noticed her eyes were the exact shade of green as the meadow that used to stretch behind the farmhouse at Willow Creek. After helping Charlotte check in and making sure she was settled, Mason drove home with his mind racing. The old maple tree flashed in his memory again, the one his great-grandfather had planted when he first broke ground on that farm. The tree that had witnessed births and deaths, marriages and heartbreaks. The tree under which Mason had buried. A time capsule as a boy, confident that someday his own children would dig it up. The rental house where he and Abby lived came into view. Small but tidy, with Abby's bicycle leaning against the porch railing. The smell of tomato sauce greeted him as he walked through the door. "Dad!" Abby looked up from where she was setting the table, her dark hair pulled back in a messy braid. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten." "Never," Mason said, hugging her tightly. "Just helping someone with car trouble." "Actually, we're having breakfast with her tomorrow." Abby raised an eyebrow in a way that made her look startlingly like her mother. "Her? Is this like a date thing?" Mason laughed. "No, definitely not a date thing. She's very pregnant for one. And it's complicated. She's connected to something from our past." "What do you mean?" Abby asked, leading him to the kitchen where pots bubbled on the stove. Mason stirred the sauce, gathering his thoughts. "She's apparently the granddaughter of the man who bought Willow Creek after we lost it." Abby went still. Though she'd been young when they lost the farm, she remembered it. Sometimes she still talked about the tire swing in the creek where they used to catch frogs in summer. "Is she going to live there?" Abby asked quietly. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's one of the things I want to find out." They ate dinner, talking about Abby's day at school and the science project she was working on. Mason tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to Charlotte Westbrook and the strange coincidence that had brought her into his garage today. After Abby went to bed, Mason sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring up at the stars. The same stars that had shone down on Willow Creek Farm for generations. He wondered what his father would think about tomorrow's breakfast meeting. What advice the old man would give. "Just hear her out," Mason could almost hear his father say in that gravelly voice. "You never know what doors might open." Morning came too quickly. Mason woke Abby earlier than usual for a Saturday, explaining again about their breakfast plans. She was curious enough about the connection to Willow Creek that she didn't complain, though she did insist on wearing her favorite blue sweater, the one her grandmother had knitted before she passed. They arrived at the Riverdale Inn at 6:55. Charlotte was already seated in a booth by the window, looking more rested than she had yesterday. She wore a simple maternity dress and had her hair down around her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said as they approached, her eyes moving curiously between Mason and Abby. "And you must be Abby. I'm Charlotte." "Nice to meet you," Abby said politely, sliding into the booth. "Dad says your grandfather bought our farm." Mason winced at his daughter's directness, but Charlotte just smiled. "Apparently so, though I only found out about it recently. I never even knew he owned property in Vermont." Mrs. Harding brought coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Abby without being asked. "Nice to see you, Mason. Been a while since." "You've come in for breakfast. Been busy," Mason replied with a smile. "Thanks, Helen." After they ordered, pancakes for Abby, eggs and toast for the adults, Charlotte leaned forward. "I spoke with my lawyer again last night, after I got settled. I asked him about the farm's history, and he confirmed that my grandfather, Edward Westbrook, purchased it at a foreclosure auction 8 years ago." Mason nodded. "That tracks with what I know." "What I don't understand," Charlotte continued, "is why he would buy a farm in Vermont and never use it. My grandfather was a shrewd businessman. He didn't make investments without a purpose." "Maybe he was planning to develop it," Mason suggested, the thought sending a pang through his chest. The idea of condos or a strip mall replacing the fields, where generations of tailors had worked the land, was almost too painful to consider. "That's what's strange," Charlotte said. "According to James, my lawyer, the deed has specific restrictions against development. It has to remain agricultural land." Abby's eyes widened. "So it's still a farm?" Charlotte smiled at her. "On paper, yes. Though from what I understand, no one's been farming it since your family left." Mason stared into his coffee cup. "The bank. Let a management company handle minimal maintenance. They mow the fields once a year to keep them from returning completely to wilderness. But the orchards, the gardens—" He trailed off, remembering the rows of apple trees his grandfather had planted, the vegetable garden his mother had tended so carefully. "I'm going to see it today, after my meeting with James," Charlotte said. Would you both like to come with me? I mean, you know the property better than anyone." Mason looked at Abby, whose eyes had lit up with hope. He should say no. Walking those fields again would only reopen old wounds, but Abby was nodding enthusiastically. "Can we, Dad? Please? I want to see if my tree fort is still there." Mason sighed. "It's probably fallen down by now, sweetheart." "But maybe not." Abby insisted. "And I want to show Charlotte the spring and the old barn and—" Okay, Mason conceded, though his chest felt tight at the thought. "If Charlotte really wants us to come along—" "I do," Charlotte said firmly, "very much so." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Charlotte asked Abby about school and her interests, showing genuine curiosity. About the girl's life. Mason watched their interaction, surprised at how easily they conversed. "So what will you do with the farm?" Mason finally asked the question that had been burning inside him since last night. Charlotte set down her fork. "Honestly, I have no idea. Until yesterday I didn't even know it existed, and now—" She gestured to her pregnant belly. "I'm about to be a single mom. I have a career in Boston as an architect. Farming isn't exactly in my skill set." It's in mine, Mason said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. You miss it, Charlotte observed. Not a question. Every day, Mason replied, his voice rough with emotion. Working with engines is fine. It pays the bills. But farming, that was in my blood. The three of them finished breakfast, making plans to meet at the farm at 3 o'clock after Charlotte's meeting with her lawyer. As Mason paid the bill, despite Charlotte's protests, he noticed Abby whispering something to Charlotte that made the woman smile and nod. What was that about, he asked, as they walked to the parking lot. Girl talk, Abby replied with a mysterious smile. See you at 3, Charlotte. As Mason drove Abby back home, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him wanted to cancel, to protect himself from the pain of seeing Willow Creek again. But another part, the part that still dreamed of rich soil beneath his fingernails and the satisfaction of watching seeds become sustenance, couldn't stay away. Dad, Abby said as they pulled into their driveway, do you think there's a reason we met Charlotte? Like maybe it's meant to be or something? Mason turned off the engine and looked at his daughter. I don't know about meant to be, but it's certainly a strange coincidence. Mom would call it serendipity, Abby said confidently. She always said that sometimes the universe puts people in your path for a reason. Mason smiled, remembering his late wife's unfailing optimism. Maybe she was right. The hours until their meeting seemed to crawl by. Mason tried to distract himself with household chores, but his mind kept returning to Willow Creek Farm, to the memories of his childhood there, to the pain of losing it, and now to the curious twist of fate that had brought Charlotte Westbrook into his life. At 2:30 they set out in Mason's truck. Abby chatted excitedly about showing Charlotte her favorite spots on the farm, while Mason prepared himself for the emotional impact of returning to the place that had defined his family for generations. As they turned onto the long gravel drive that led to Willow Creek Farm, Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The familiar landscape unfurled before them, rolling fields bordered by stone walls built by his ancestors, the curve of the creek that gave the farm its name, and finally, at the end of the drive, the white farmhouse with its wraparound porch and green shutters, and there, standing tall at the edge of the eastern field, was the old maple tree, still reaching skyward like weathered hands in prayer, still standing sentinel over the tailor, legacy, waiting as if it had known all along that someday, somehow, Mason would find his way home. Charlotte's silver Lexus pulled up behind Mason's truck as he and Abby stood in the circular driveway, taking in the silent farmhouse. She emerged carefully from the driver's seat, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. I rented a car after my meeting, she explained, walking toward them. The lawyer had quite a bit to tell me. Mason nodded, his throat tight with emotion, as his eyes traveled over the weathered clapboards of his childhood home. How did it go? Surprisingly illuminating. Charlotte joined them, gazing up at the 2-story farmhouse. It's beautiful, older than I expected. Built in 1887 by my great-great-grandfather, Mason said. Every generation added something. The east wing was my grandfather. The porch was my father. Abby tugged on Charlotte's sleeve. Can we go inside, please? I want to see if my room is still the same. Charlotte hesitated, glancing at Mason. I have the keys, but it's your home, really. You should lead the way. Mason swallowed hard, then took the keys she offered. It hasn't been our home for 8 years. Maybe it could be again, Charlotte said softly. But Mason was already walking toward the porch. Steps. Abby bounding ahead eagerly. The key turned in the lock with a familiar resistance. It always stuck slightly in humid weather. The door swung open with a creak that echoed through Mason's memories. The entryway was dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light filtering through closed curtains. It smells the same, Abby whispered, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. And It did. Beneath the mustiness of disuse lay the subtle scent of pine and old wood that had always defined the Taylor home. "The power should be on," Charlotte said. "My lawyer arranged for the utilities to be activated yesterday." Mason found the light switch, and warm yellow light flooded the entryway, revealing hardwood floors dulled by dust and walls that needed fresh paint, but were otherwise intact. The furniture was gone, sold at auction after the foreclosure, but the built-in bookshelves his father had crafted still lined the living room wall. "Dad, can I go see my room?" Abby was practically vibrating with excitement. "Go ahead," Mason said, watching as she raced up the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. "She remember it well?" Charlotte asked, running her hand along the banister. "Better than I expected. She was only 4 when we left." Mason walked into the kitchen, his heart squeezing at the sight of the old cast-iron sink and the worn countertops, where his mother had taught him to bake bread. The bank sold off all the furniture and equipment, but they left the house intact. Charlotte followed him, taking in the spacious country kitchen with its bay window overlooking what had once been a thriving vegetable garden. "It's a wonderful space. It just needs some life brought back into it." Mason turned to her, suddenly remembering why they were there. "You said your meeting was illuminating." Charlotte nodded, leaning against the counter. "James gave me the full story, or at least what he knows of it." She took a deep breath. "My grandfather bought this farm 8 years ago through a holding company. He specifically instructed that it be maintained, but not developed or sold." "Why would he do that?" Mason asked, genuinely puzzled. "That's where it gets interesting." Charlotte met his eyes. "Did you know a man named Thomas Westbrook?" Mason frowned, searching his memory. "The name sounds vaguely familiar. My father might have mentioned him once or twice." "He was my father. And according to the documents James showed me today, he grew up in Riverdale." "Your father was from here?" Mason's surprise was evident. "But you said you'd never been to Vermont before." "I haven't. My father left when he was 18 and never came back. He never talked about his childhood." Charlotte's hand absently stroked her baby bump. "He and my grandfather had some kind of falling out. I grew up knowing my grandfather only as a distant figure who sent birthday checks but never visited." From upstairs came the sound of Abby's excited voice calling down to them. "Dad, my cloud wallpaper is still here, and the window seat." "That's great, sweetheart," Mason called back, his mind racing to connect the dots Charlotte was laying out. "So your grandfather was from Riverdale too?" Charlotte nodded. "Born and raised here, apparently. He made his fortune in Boston real estate development, but kept tabs on his hometown from afar." She paused. "James found a letter in my grandfather's files. It was supposed to be given to me along with the deed to this property, but it got misplaced in the settling of the estate." From her purse, Charlotte withdrew an envelope, yellowed slightly with age. She handed it to Mason. "I think you should read it too." Mason took the envelope, noting the formal script that addressed it simply to Charlotte. He glanced at her for confirmation, before carefully opening it and unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. "My dear Charlotte, if you're reading this, then I have passed on, and you have finally learned about Willow Creek Farm. I imagine you're confused about why I would leave you property in a town you've never visited, connected to a family history your father never shared. The truth is complicated, as family matters often are. Your father, Thomas, grew up alongside David Taylor on neighboring farms. They were inseparable as boys, best friends who swore they would never leave Vermont. But life rarely follows the paths we plan in youth. When your father fell in love with your mother, a Boston girl summering in Vermont, I objected strongly. I feared he would abandon his heritage, his hometown, and most painfully his friendship with David. We argued bitterly. Things were said that couldn't be unsaid. Your father left with your mother, vowing never to return to Riverdale, and he kept that promise. What your father never knew was that David and I maintained a friendship over the years. I watched from afar as David took over his family farm, married, had a son of his own. When David fell ill, he called me, knowing your father would not come. On his deathbed, he made me promise to look after his son, Mason, and the farm that had been in the Taylor family for generations. I failed in that promise. Business kept me away too long, and by the time I learned of the foreclosure, it was too late to prevent it. The best I could do was purchase the property through a holding company to ensure it wouldn't be developed or broken apart. I always intended to find a way to return it to Mason Taylor, but pride and old age prevented me from making amends directly. So now I leave this task to you, my granddaughter. Willow Creek Farm belongs with the Taylors. How you choose to facilitate this is your decision, but I hope you will find a way to right an old wrong and perhaps heal a rift between families that has lasted far too long. With love and regret, Edward. Westbrook Mason lowered the letter, his hands trembling slightly. David Taylor was my father, he said quietly. I had no idea he knew your grandfather, let alone that they were friends. Neither did I, Charlotte admitted. My father never spoke of his childhood. I knew almost nothing about his life before Boston. Abby came bounding down the stairs, her excitement palpable. Dad, everything's dusty, but it's all still there, even the little shelf where I kept my stuffed animals. She skidded to a halt, noticing the serious expressions on the adults' faces. What's wrong? Mason folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Charlotte. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. We're just learning some family history. Charlotte slipped the letter back into her purse. Your dad and my dad were best friends when they were boys, Abby. They grew up right next to each other. Abby's eyes widened. Really? That's so cool. So we're like almost family. The innocent question hung in the air as Mason and Charlotte exchanged glances. Let's see the rest of the house, Mason suggested, not ready to process the implications of the letter. And then maybe we can walk the property a bit. They toured the empty rooms, Mason pointing out features and sharing memories. Charlotte listened attentively, asking questions about the history of the farm and the generations of Taylors who had worked the land. Abby flitted from room to room, excited to rediscover spaces that had grown hazy in her young memory. When they stepped outside onto the back porch, Mason felt a physical ache at the sight of the overgrown fields stretching toward the tree line. The apple orchard was visible in the distance, the trees unpruned, but still standing. It could be brought back, Charlotte said, reading his expression. The land is still good. Mason nodded, unable to trust his voice. They walked in silence down the worn path that led to the old maple tree. Abby ran ahead, excited to show Charlotte the creek that gave the farm its name. My great-grandfather planted this tree when he first broke ground here, Mason said when they reached the massive maple. 5 generations of Taylors have climbed it, carved initials in it, built swings on it. Charlotte placed her hand on the rough bark. It's magnificent. Dad, Abby called from the creek bank. The tire swing is gone, but the rope is still there. They walked toward Abby. Charlotte suddenly stopped, placing a hand on her belly. Oh, you okay? Mason asked, concerned. Yes, she smiled. The baby's just very active today. Here, without thinking, she took Mason's hand and placed it on the side of her belly. Feel that? Mason felt a strong kick against his palm and couldn't help but smile. That's a strong one. He or she has been doing gymnastics ever since we arrived, Charlotte said. Maybe they sensed the open space. They continued to the creek, where Abby was already taking off her shoes to wade in the shallow water. Mason started to call out a warning, but stopped himself. It was a warm day, and the creek was barely knee-deep. She's happy here, Charlotte observed as they watched Abby splash around. She always was, Mason admitted. After we lost the farm, she had nightmares for months. She'd wake up crying, saying she couldn't find her way home. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. What would you do with this place if it were yours again? The question caught Mason off guard. I don't know. I've tried not to think about it too much. Safer that way. But if you could. Mason looked out, over the fields, allowing himself to imagine the possibility for the first time in years. I'd bring it back to what it was, organic produce, the apple orchard, maybe expand the berry patches. My father was starting to transition toward agritourism before he got sick. Farm-to-table dinners, pick your own apples in the fall. That sounds wonderful, Charlotte said sincerely. It was our dream, Mason said, then caught himself. But that was a different life. They watched Abby splash in the creek for a while longer, then continued their tour of the property. Mason showed Charlotte the barn, which needed repairs but was structurally sound. The old tractor was gone, sold with everything else, but the hayloft where Mason had played as a boy was intact. As the afternoon light began to fade, they made their way back to the house. Abby's shoes were muddy, her jeans wet to the knees, but her face glowed with happiness. "Do we have to leave?" she asked as they reached the cars. Mason looked at Charlotte, who held out the house keys. "You should keep these," she said. "I need to get back to Boston tomorrow, but I'd like to talk more before I go. Maybe dinner tonight, my treat." "You don't have to," Mason began. "Please," Charlotte interrupted. "I'd like to. There's a lot to discuss." Mason hesitated, then nodded. "There's a decent place in town, Riverside Grill. Nothing fancy, but good food." "Perfect. 7 o'clock. When Mason nodded, Charlotte looked at Abby. "And you'll come too, right? I want to hear more about this tree fort you mentioned." Abby beamed. "Yes, please." As Charlotte drove away, Mason stood in the driveway of Willow Creek Farm, the keys heavy in his hand. He felt as if he were standing on the edge of something momentous, something that could change everything. "Dad?" Abby's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are we going to get our farm back?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Mason answered honestly. "It's complicated. Because of Charlotte's baby." Mason looked at his daughter, surprised by her perception. "That's part of it. Charlotte has her own life in Boston, a career, a baby on the way. But the farm belongs to us," Abby said, with the simple conviction of youth. Her grandfather's letter said so. "It's not that simple," Mason sighed. "Legally, the farm belongs to Charlotte now." They drove back to their rental house in contemplative silence. While Abby showered off the creek mud, Mason sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. At 6:45, they headed to the Riverside Grill. Charlotte was already there, seated, at a corner table. She'd changed into a floral maternity dress and looked remarkably at ease for someone who'd just discovered unexpected family connections and inherited a farm in a town she'd never visited before. "I took the liberty of ordering appetizers," she said as they sat down. The waitress recommended the spinach artichoke dip. "It's the best," Abby agreed enthusiastically. "Dad and I come here for my birthday every year." Dinner conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Charlotte asked Abby about school and her friends, and Mason found himself relaxing as he watched the easy rapport developing between them. When Abby excused herself to visit the restroom, Charlotte turned to Mason with a more serious expression. "I've been thinking about the farm all afternoon," she said, absently twisting the paper wrapper from her straw. "About what my grandfather wrote in that letter." Mason nodded. "It was unexpected." "Mason," Charlotte leaned forward, her green eyes intent. "I want to do what my grandfather asked. I want to return Willow Creek to the Taylor family." Mason felt his heart skip. Charlotte, I appreciate the sentiment, but that farm is worth a considerable amount of money. I can't afford to buy it from you, not on a mechanic's salary. I'm not asking you to buy it, Charlotte said. I'm proposing something else entirely. She took a deep breath. A partnership. A partnership? Mason repeated, confused. Yes, the farm becomes yours again, your name on the deed alongside mine. You move back in, restore it the way you described today, make it a working farm again. Charlotte's words came faster now, as if she'd been thinking about this all afternoon. I contribute the capital needed for equipment, repairs, whatever's necessary to get it operational. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Mason asked. Cautiously, Charlotte's hand went to her belly. A place for my child to know their heritage, a connection to family history I never had growing up. She paused. And maybe a percentage of the farm's profits once it's up and running again. Mason stared at her, trying to process the offer. You'd be investing a lot of money with no guarantee of return. I don't need guarantees, Charlotte said simply. I need purpose. My grandfather left me plenty of money along with that farm. Money I didn't earn and don't particularly need. But a legacy. Roots, those I could use. Her voice softened. Especially now. What about your life in Boston? Your career? I'm an architect. I can work remotely for my firm, at least part-time. And to be honest, I've been thinking about scaling. Back anyway, especially after the baby comes. Charlotte looked around the restaurant. There's something about this place. It feels right, like I've been missing it without knowing it existed. Abby returned to the table, sliding into her seat. What are you guys talking about? You look super serious. Mason exchanged a glance with Charlotte, who nodded slightly. Charlotte has made us an offer, Mason said carefully. She's suggested that we might be able to move back to Willow Creek Farm. Abby's eyes widened. For real? We can go home? It's complicated, sweetheart, Mason cautioned. It would be a partnership. Charlotte would own part of the farm too. So Charlotte and her baby would live there with us? Abby asked, looking between the adults. Not right away, Charlotte said gently. I need to go back to Boston to finish some projects and prepare for the baby. But eventually, yes, I'd split my time between Boston and here. Abby considered this. I think that would be awesome. The house is big enough for everybody. She turned to her father. Can we do it, Dad? Please? Mason felt the weight of the moment, the lives balanced on his decision. I'd need to think about it, make sure it makes sense financially, practically. Of course, Charlotte agreed. I don't expect an answer tonight, but I do need to head back to Boston tomorrow afternoon. She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Mason. My personal cell is on the back. When you decide, call me. As they finished dinner, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Mason's mind kept returning to Charlotte's offer. It seemed too good to be true. A chance to reclaim his family's legacy, to give Abby back the home she'd lost, to return to the work that had defined generations of Taylors. After dinner, they walked Charlotte back to the Riverdale Inn. The evening air was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Thank you for today, Charlotte said as they reached the inn's entrance, for showing me the farm, for sharing your memories. Thank you for the offer, Mason replied. It's generous, more than generous. Charlotte smiled. Consider it a way of correcting an old wrong. My grandfather would be pleased. Abby gave Charlotte an impulsive hug. I hope you say yes, Dad, she whispered, loud enough for both adults to hear. After saying goodnight to Charlotte, Mason and Abby walked back to their truck in silence. As they drove home, Abby finally spoke. Dad, what are you going to do? Mason gripped the steering wheel, his thoughts a tangle of hope and caution. I don't know yet, Abby. It's a big decision. But it's our farm, Abby insisted. And Charlotte seems nice, and her baby could be my friend when it gets bigger. Despite his turmoil, Mason smiled at his daughter's simple logic. There's a lot to consider. The garage, for one thing. I'd have to sell it or find someone to run it. Rick could run it, Abby suggested immediately. He's always saying he wants more responsibility. Mason chuckled. You've got it all figured out, don't you? They arrived home, and Abby went to get ready for bed. Mason sat on the porch swing, Charlotte's business card in his hand, staring up at the same stars that shone over Willow Creek Farm. The decision before him wasn't just about a piece of land or a house. It was about heritage and legacy, about giving his daughter roots in the soil that had nourished 5 generations of Taylors. It was about second chances and unexpected connections. And perhaps, Mason thought, as he remembered Charlotte's determined green eyes and the letter from her grandfather, it was about healing old wounds that had festered long enough. Inside, he heard Abby moving around her bedroom, humming to herself. She had already made her choice clear. Now it was up to him to decide whether to take a leap of faith, to believe that sometimes life offers unexpected paths back to the places we thought were lost forever. The morning dawned cool and misty, typical for early autumn in Vermont. Mason sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, Charlotte's business card propped against the sugar bowl. He'd barely slept, his mind spinning with possibilities and concerns in equal measure. Through the window, he could see Abby in the backyard, tossing a tennis ball for Mrs. Peterson's dog they were watching for the weekend. She looked carefree, happier than he'd seen her in months. The visit to Willow Creek Farm had awakened something in her, a connection to her roots that Mason hadn't realized she was missing so acutely. He picked up his phone and dialed Rick's number. If he was going to consider Charlotte's offer seriously, he needed to understand what would happen to the garage. "Boss, everything okay?" Rick answered, sounding sleepy. It was early for a Sunday. "Sorry to call so early. Got a minute to talk?" 20 minutes later, Mason hung up, thoughtful. Rick had been surprisingly enthusiastic about the possibility of taking over the garage. "I've been wanting to talk to you about buying in as a partner anyway," he'd admitted. This could be perfect timing. One hurdle potentially cleared. Mason glanced at the calendar hanging on the fridge. 2.5 months until the first snow typically hit. If, and it was still a big if, he agreed to Charlotte's proposal, they'd need to move quickly to weatherize the farmhouse and prepare for winter. His phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "Heading to brunch at the inn before driving back to Boston. Would love to see you both before I go." 10 a.m., Mason responded affirmatively, then called Abby inside. "Charlotte wants to meet for brunch before she heads back to Boston," he told her. "Go get cleaned up." Abby's eyes lit up. "Does that mean you've decided about the farm?" "It means we're having brunch," Mason hedged. "Go on now." At the Riverdale Inn, Charlotte was waiting in the dining room, a small wrapped package on the table beside her. She looked rested, her chestnut hair pulled back in a loose braid, her green eyes brightening when she spotted them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted as they sat down. "I know I dropped quite a bombshell on you last night." Mason nodded. "It's a lot to process." "What's that?" Abby asked, eyeing the package. Charlotte smiled. "Just a little something I found in town this morning. The gift shop down the street was open early." She pushed the package toward Abby. "Go ahead." Abby unwrapped it eagerly, revealing a small snow globe with a miniature farmhouse inside. "It's like Willow Creek," she exclaimed, shaking it to send. Tiny white flakes swirling around the scene. "The closest I could find," Charlotte agreed. "A reminder of our visit, whatever you decide." Mrs. Harding approached with coffee for the adults and orange juice for Abby. "Special Sunday waffles today," she announced, with fresh blueberries from the miller's farm. They placed their orders, and when Mrs. Harding moved away, Charlotte looked expectantly at Mason. "So, have you had any thoughts about my proposal?" Mason took a deep breath. I've been thinking about little else. I spoke with Rick this morning, my employee at the garage. He's interested in taking it over, possibly as a partner at first. Charlotte's eyes lit up. That's a good sign, isn't it? Maybe, Mason conceded, but there are still a lot of variables. The farm's been neglected for 8 years. It would take significant investment to get it operational again. I understand that, Charlotte said, and I'm prepared for that investment. My grandfather left me more than enough to fund the restoration, but why would you want to? Mason asked the question that had been bothering him all night. You don't know me. You don't know Abby. Why tie yourself to us and to this place? Charlotte considered his question thoughtfully. Some of it is honoring my grandfather's wishes, she admitted, but it's more than that. Her hand went to her belly, a gesture Mason had noticed she made often when thinking deeply. When I found out I was pregnant and my husband walked out, I felt rootless, like I was floating without an anchor. Learning about this farm, about the connection between our families, it feels like finding something I didn't even know I was missing. Abby, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. I felt that way too, after we lost the farm. Like something important was gone. Charlotte reached across the table and squeezed Abby's hand. Exactly. And now maybe we can both find what we've been missing. She looked back at Mason. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know this is huge. But I do need to head back. To Boston today. Mason nodded, then made a decision. What if I came to Boston next weekend? We could discuss details more thoroughly, draw up some kind of preliminary agreement. Charlotte's face brightened. That would be perfect. I could have James draft something for us to review together. And I'll bring Abby, Mason added. She's never seen Boston. Really? Abby nearly knocked over her orange juice in excitement. We're going to Boston? Just to talk, Mason cautioned. No decisions yet. Their food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Mrs. Harding stopped by their table again. Charlotte, I put together that list of contractors you asked about, she said, placing a folded paper beside Charlotte's plate. These are all local folks who do good work, fair prices too. Thank you, Helen, Charlotte said warmly. That's extremely helpful. When Mrs. Harding moved away, Mason raised an eyebrow. Contractors? Charlotte looked slightly embarrassed. I thought it would be good to have some names just in case. The farmhouse needs work, regardless of what you decide. Mason felt a surge of respect for Charlotte's practicality. You don't leave much to chance, do you? Occupational hazard of being an architect, she admitted with a smile. We plan for contingencies. After brunch, they walked Charlotte to her rental car. The morning mist had burned off, leaving a crisp, clear autumn day. The maples lining Main Street were just beginning to show hints of their coming glory, touches of red and gold at the edges of green leaves. I'll text you my address in Boston, Charlotte said as she prepared to leave. Maybe Friday evening? You could stay the weekend. We'll aim for that. Mason agreed, still marveling at how quickly events were moving. Just 48 hours ago, he'd been a mechanic with a small garage and modest dreams. Now he was contemplating reclaiming his family's heritage and entering into a business partnership with a woman he'd just met. Charlotte hesitated, then surprised both Mason and Abby by hugging them. Thank you for sharing your memories of the farm with me, she said quietly. It means more than you know. They watched her drive away, Abby clutching her snow globe and waving until the car disappeared around the bend. I like her, Abby declared as they walked to Mason's truck. And I think her baby will be nice too. Mason smiled at his daughters. Simple assessment. We barely know her, Abby. Sometimes you just know about people, Abby replied with the confidence of youth. Mom always said you could tell a lot about someone by how they listen to you. Charlotte really listens. The observation, so reminiscent of something his late wife would say, caught Mason off guard. Your mom was good at reading people, he agreed softly. The week passed in a blur of activity. Mason spoke with his landlord about possibly breaking their lease. Surprisingly, Mr. Jenkins was understanding. His nephew was looking for a place anyway. Rick began learning the administrative side of running the garage. Mason even called his old friend at the bank to discuss financing options, just in case Charlotte's proposal didn't work out the way she envisioned. By Friday morning, when they set out for Boston, Mason had worked through most of the practical concerns. What remained were the intangibles. Could he trust Charlotte to hold up her end of this unusual partnership? Would Abby thrive back at the farm? And could Mason himself, after 8 years away, step back into the role of farmer, steward of the land that had defined his family for generations? The drive to Boston took just under 4 hours. Abby, excited for her first visit to the city, peppered Mason with questions about the tall buildings and the harbor she'd seen in pictures. Mason, who had only visited a few times himself, answered as best he could, grateful for the distraction from his own thoughts. Charlotte's address led them to a renovated warehouse in South Boston, converted into upscale lofts. She buzzed them in, meeting them at the elevator on the 5th floor. She looked different in her urban environment, more polished somehow in dark maternity jeans and a soft blue sweater, though her smile was just as warm. "Welcome. You found it okay?" She led them into a spacious loft with exposed brick walls and tall windows overlooking the city. "I hope traffic wasn't too bad." "Not at all," Mason assured her, taking in the stylish, minimalist space. Original artwork hung on the walls, and architectural models sat on display shelves. Charlotte's work, he assumed. Abby was immediately drawn to the wall of windows. "You can see everything from here," she marveled, gazing at the skyline. "Wait until you see it at night," Charlotte promised. "The lights are beautiful." She turned to Mason. "I hope the guest room is okay. It's just through there. One queen. In bed, but I can make up the sofa if Abby wants her own space." "We'll be fine," Mason assured her. "This is not what I expected," Charlotte laughed. "The pregnant lady living in a loft with no elevator? Not typical, I know. I've been looking at ground floor options lately." "I meant it's beautiful," Mason clarified. "Very different from Riverdale. Different from my childhood home in Back Bay, too," Charlotte admitted. "My parents' house was all antiques and history. I wanted something that was just mine." She gestured toward the kitchen area. "Are you hungry? I thought we could go out later, but I have snacks." While Abby investigated the view and the snacks, Charlotte led Mason to her dining table, which was covered with papers and a laptop. "James, my lawyer, has been working on a draft agreement," she explained. "Nothing binding yet, just a framework. For us to discuss." She handed him a folder. "The basic premise is a partnership. The farm would be legally owned by both of us, 50-50. I provide the capital investment required to make it operational again. Equipment, repairs, working. Capital. You provide the expertise and day-to-day management." Mason scanned the document, impressed by its thoroughness. "This is comprehensive." "James is good at what he does," Charlotte agreed. "There's also a section about profit distribution once. The farm is generating income, options for buying out either partner if necessary, and provisions for what happens if—" She hesitated, then continued, "if either of us passes away." Mason looked up sharply. "That's morbid." "It's practical," Charlotte corrected gently. "I'm about to be responsible for a child. You already are. We should have clarity about what happens to this venture if something happens to either of us." Mason nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her foresight. "And what happens?" "If something happens to me, my share passes to my child, with you as trustee until they're of age," Charlotte explained. "If something happens to you, your share passes to Abby, with me as trustee until she's of age." Mason continued reading, finding provision after provision that seemed fair and well considered. This looks surprisingly reasonable, he admitted. Did you expect me to try to swindle you? Charlotte teased. No, but this is a substantial investment on your part with relatively little control. Most investors would want more say in day-to-day operations. Charlotte shrugged. I'm not most investors. I have no expertise in farming. That's your domain. I'm interested in preservation, restoration, and creating something sustainable for our children. The way she casually linked their children's futures didn't escape Mason's notice. It was strange how quickly this connection had formed, built on the foundation of an old friendship between their fathers that neither had known about until days ago. Abby joined them at the table, munching on an apple. "This place is awesome," she declared. "Can I see your room, Charlotte?" "Abby," Mason cautioned, "that's a bit personal." "It's fine," Charlotte assured him. "Come on, I'll give you the tour." While Abby and Charlotte explored the loft, Mason continued reviewing the agreement. The more he read, the more he realized that Charlotte had crafted a proposal that addressed nearly every concern he'd had. There were contingencies for poor harvests, provisions for expanding into agritourism as his father had envisioned, even an option for Charlotte to design and oversee the construction of her own residence on the property if she decided to split. Her time between Boston and Vermont. When they returned, Abby was chattering excitedly about the baby's room, which Charlotte had apparently begun to prepare. "She has this awesome crib that's like modern but also kind of old-fashioned, and the walls are this really pretty green color, like the meadow at Willow Creek." Charlotte smiled apologetically at Mason. "She wanted to see the nursery. I hope—" "That's okay. Of course," Mason assured her. "This agreement," he tapped the folder, "you've put a lot of thought into it." "I have," Charlotte acknowledged, "but it's just a starting point. If there's anything you want to change, we can discuss it." She glanced at her watch. "I made dinner reservations for 7 at a place nearby. Italian okay with everyone?" "Perfect." Mason agreed. "That gives me time to review this more thoroughly. And I promised Abby I'd show her the rooftop garden," Charlotte added. "It has a great view of the harbor." As they left for the rooftop, Mason found himself watching Charlotte with growing respect. She was nothing like he would have expected from someone of her background. There was a groundedness to her, a practical nature that belied her evident wealth and privilege. She treated Abby with genuine interest and respect, not talking down, to her as adults often did. By the time they returned, Mason had read the agreement twice and noted only minor questions. They enjoyed a lively dinner at a family-owned Italian restaurant where the owner knew Charlotte by name and fussed over her pregnancy with grandmotherly enthusiasm. After dinner, they walked along the harbor, Abby marveling at the lights reflecting on the water. Back at the loft, Charlotte made hot chocolate while Mason put an overtired but happy Abby to bed in the guest room. When he returned to the living area, Charlotte was sitting by the windows, gazing out at the city lights. "She's a wonderful girl," Charlotte said softly. "You've done an amazing job with her." "Thanks," Mason said, accepting the mug she offered. "It hasn't always been easy." "The best things rarely are," Charlotte replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city glittering below them. "I've read the agreement," Mason finally said. "It's fair, more than fair." Charlotte turned to him, her expression cautiously hopeful. "Does that mean you're considering it?" "I'm more than considering it," Mason admitted. "If you're truly serious about this, I think we should do it." The words felt momentous as soon as they left his mouth. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a complete redirection of his and Abby's lives, a return to roots he'd thought severed forever. "I'm serious," Charlotte assured him, her voice steady. "I wouldn't have proposed it otherwise." "Then I have one condition to add to the agreement," Mason said. "What's that?" Charlotte asked, looking slightly wary. "A timeline," Mason replied. "If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly. The farmhouse needs to be winterized before the first snow, which typically hits by mid-November. The fields need attention before they go dormant. There are 100 tasks that should be done before winter sets in. Charlotte nodded, looking relieved. That makes sense. I can work remotely for the next few weeks to oversee the initial renovations. My firm knows I'll be taking maternity leave soon anyway. She hesitated. But what about you and Abby? The school year has just started. Riverdale has a good school, Mason said. Better than where she is now, honestly. She'd have to transfer, but she's resilient. She'd adjust. He took a breath. And Rick is keen to take over the garage. We could work out a transition plan there too. So we're doing this, Charlotte asked, her eyes bright. We're really doing this. Mason felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. We're doing this. Charlotte impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you for trusting me with this, with your family's legacy. Thank you for making it possible, Mason replied simply. They spent the rest of the evening discussing practicalities, which contractors to call first, what equipment would be needed immediately, how to handle the transition for Abby's schooling. The conversation flowed easily, each building on the other's ideas, finding solutions to potential problems before they arose. As Mason finally retired to the guest room, carefully sliding into bed beside his sleeping daughter, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Tomorrow they would meet with Charlotte's lawyer to finalize the agreement. Next week they would begin the process of reclaiming Willow Creek Farm, not just as it had been, but as something new, a blending of past and future, of Taylor and Westbrook, of Vermont roots and Boston sophistication. Outside the window of Charlotte's loft, the city lights twinkled in the darkness. But in Mason's mind, he was already back at Willow Creek, standing beneath the old maple tree, its branches reaching skyward like weathered hands in prayer, hands that had held 5 generations of Taylors and would now welcome a new generation, Abby growing into her heritage, and soon a baby who would bridge 2 families once connected by friendship, separated by misunderstanding, and now reunited. By chance and choice, Mason fell asleep with the image of that tree in his mind, a living symbol of roots that ran deeper than he'd ever known. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. After signing the partnership agreement in James Whitman's elegant Boston office, Mason and Charlotte wasted no time setting their plan in motion. Back in Riverdale, Mason gave notice at their rental house and began negotiations with Rick to transition ownership of the garage. Charlotte hired local contractors from Mrs. Harding's list to address the most urgent repairs at the farmhouse: a new water heater, electrical updates, and reinforcement of the sagging back porch. By mid-October, the first frost had dusted the Vermont countryside, and Mason and Abby were ready to move back to Willow Creek Farm. Charlotte had arranged for the delivery of essential furniture, beds, a dining table, a comfortable sofa for the living room, but left plenty of space for the Taylors to make the house their own again. "Are you sure you don't want to come up for the move-in?" Mason asked during one of their nightly phone calls, which had become a comfortable ritual. "I know you've got work to wrap up, but—" "I wish I could," Charlotte replied, the regret evident in her voice. "But this project deadline is immovable, and my doctor advised against unnecessary travel past 36 weeks. How are you feeling?" Mason found himself genuinely concerned about Charlotte's well-being, despite the physical distance between and them. "Like a beached whale," Charlotte laughed. "But healthy. The doctor says everything looks good." She paused. "I did want to ask you something, though." "Shoot. I'd like to come up after the baby is born. Maybe stay for a few weeks or months, if that wouldn't be too disruptive for you and Abby." She hurried on before Mason could respond. "I could stay in the East Wing guest suite. The contractors say it'll be ready by then. I want my baby to know Willow Creek from the beginning." Mason felt a warmth spread through him at the thought. "Charlotte, it's your home too now. Of course you can come. Abby would be thrilled, and I could use the help planning the spring planting." "Thank you," Charlotte said softly. "Now go get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." The morning of the moving day dawned crisp and clear. Mason stood in the driveway of their rental house, watching as the small moving truck was loaded with their modest belongings. Abby darted around excitedly, making sure her bicycle and book collection were properly secured. "Ready for this?" Mason asked his daughter as they prepared to leave. Abby nodded emphatically. "More than ready. I've been ready for 8 years." "Dad." The simple truth in her statement struck Mason deeply. In many ways, they had been in a holding pattern since losing the farm, existing but not fully living, making do but never thriving. Today marked the end of that limbo. When they arrived at Willow Creek, Mason was surprised to see several vehicles already there: Mrs. Harding's station wagon, Pastor Wilson's truck, and several others belonging to neighbors and old friends. A hand-painted banner hung from the porch railing. "Welcome home, Taylors." "What's all this?" Mason asked as people emerged from the farmhouse, smiling and waving. Mrs. Harding approached, beaming. "Charlotte called last week, asked us to organize a little welcome committee. We've got the house all warmed up and lunch in the kitchen." Abby was already racing toward Jenny Wilson, her old friend from kindergarten. Mason felt his throat tighten with emotion. "This is unexpected." "That's what community is for," Pastor Wilson said, clapping Mason on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get this truck unloaded. The women have made chicken pot pie, and I, for one, don't want it getting cold." The move-in that could have been lonely and overwhelming became a celebration instead. Neighbors Mason hadn't seen in years showed up to help carry furniture, arrange the kitchen, and offer advice about the condition of the fields. By sunset, the house was in reasonable order, and Mason and Abby stood on the back porch, waving goodbye to the last of their helpers. "That was amazing," Abby said, leaning against her father. "I forgot how nice everyone is here." "Me too," Mason admitted. His phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "How's it going?" "Successfully moved in." He snapped a picture of Abby standing on the porch with the sunset-drenched fields behind her and sent it with the caption, "Home at last. You're responsible for the welcome committee." Charlotte's response came quickly. "Guilty. Every homecoming deserves a celebration." "Is that Charlotte?" Abby asked, peering at the phone. "Tell her thank you for the welcome party, and for my room." Charlotte had arranged for Abby's bedroom to be painted her favorite shade of blue, and had somehow found bedding that matched the cloud pattern of her old wallpaper. It was a thoughtful touch that had brought tears to Abby's eyes when she saw it. Over the next few weeks, Mason divided his time between helping Rick take over the garage and beginning the assessment of the farm's needs. The fields had been minimally maintained, but would require significant work before spring planting. The apple orchard needed extensive pruning. The barn was structurally sound, but would need updates to accommodate modern equipment. Charlotte, meanwhile, wrapped up her projects in Boston and prepared for the baby's arrival. They spoke nearly every day, with Mason sending photos of the farm's progress and Charlotte sharing updates on nursery preparations and doctor's appointments. "Have you thought about names yet?" Mason asked during one call, as he walked the perimeter of the north field, checking the old stone walls. "I have a short list," Charlotte admitted. "For a boy, I'm leaning toward Jonathan Edward. Jonathan was my father's middle name, and Edward for my grandfather. And if it's a girl—" There was a brief hesitation before Charlotte answered. "If it's a girl, I was thinking Olivia Grace. Olivia was my mother's name." "Both are beautiful names," Mason assured her. Something in her tone suggested uncertainty. "But you don't sound convinced." Charlotte sighed. "I'm overthinking it, probably. Names are so important, you know. They connect us to the past, but also shape the future." I remember that feeling, Mason said, thinking back to when he and his wife had debated names for Abby. But kids grow into their names, make them their own. How did you choose Abby's name? Abigail was my mother's name, Mason explained, and Kate, her middle name, was my wife's grandmother. Family connections, like you're planning. Did I hear? My name! Abby appeared from behind the stone wall, carrying a bucket of apples she'd collected from the orchard. At 12, she was at that gangly stage between child and teenager, all long limbs and boundless energy. Just telling Charlotte how you got your name, Mason explained, putting the phone on speaker. Hi, Abby. Charlotte's voice came through clearly. How are you liking being back at the farm? It's the best, Abby exclaimed. I've been exploring everywhere. The tree fort did fall down, but Dad says we can build a new one in the spring. And I found a family of rabbits living near the creek. That sounds wonderful, Charlotte replied warmly. Save some adventures for when the baby and I visit, okay? Definitely. When are you coming? Soon, right? As soon as the baby and I are cleared for travel, Charlotte promised. A few weeks after the birth, probably. After they hung up, Mason and Abby continued their inspection of the property. The girl was practically skipping, her earlier enthusiasm undiminished by weeks of hard work and adjustment. The move back to Riverdale and the farm had been overwhelmingly positive for her. She'd reconnected with old friends, was thriving at her new old school, and spent every possible moment outdoors, reacquainting herself with the land. For Mason, the transition had been more complex. The joy of reclaiming his heritage was tempered by the practical challenges of restoring the farm and the emotional weight of memories that lurked in every corner. Sometimes he found himself standing in the same spot where his father had taught him to drive a tractor, or where his mother had gathered herbs for Sunday dinner, and the grief would hit him anew, not just for what had been lost, but for the years that could never be reclaimed. Yet alongside the melancholy ran a current of deep satisfaction. This land, this legacy was where he belonged. Each sunrise over the eastern ridge reaffirmed his decision to accept Charlotte's unusual proposal. And then there was Charlotte herself, a presence in their lives despite her physical absence. Her influence was evident in the newly repaired roof, the modern appliances in the kitchen, the seed catalogues and agricultural references that arrived regularly in the mail. Through daily calls and texts, she had become a fixture in their routine, her practical questions and thoughtful suggestions weaving her into the fabric of their daily lives. A week before Thanksgiving, Mason received a call from Charlotte's lawyer. James, Charlotte asked me to update you, James said, his typically formal tone edged with warmth. She went into labor early this morning. Everything's progressing normally, but she wanted you to know. Mason's heart raced unexpectedly. That's great news. Please tell her we're thinking of her. I will. She also asked me to handle some business matters while she's otherwise occupied. James chuckled slightly at his own understatement. The equipment you requested has been approved for purchase. I've sent the authorization to the dealer in Burlington, and the contractor will start on the East Wing renovations tomorrow, as scheduled. Thank you, James, Mason said sincerely, for everything you've done to facilitate this partnership. I know it's unconventional. Indeed it is, James agreed. But in my 30 years of practice, I've learned that unconventional arrangements often yield the most rewarding results. He paused. Charlotte is a remarkably determined young woman. When she sets her mind to something, obstacles tend to fall away. I've noticed that, Mason said with a smile, thinking of the methodical way Charlotte had addressed every potential hurdle in their partnership. I'll call when there's news about the baby, James promised before hanging up. Mason immediately told Abby, who reacted with predictable excitement. We should make something for the baby, she declared, a welcome gift from Willow Creek. Together, they spent the evening crafting a care package, maple syrup from the old trees at the edge of the property, honey from Mrs. Wilson's hives, a hand-carved wooden train Mason had been working on in the evenings, and a colourful blanket Abby had been learning to knit under Mrs. Harding's tutelage. The call came shortly after midnight. Mason, who had been too restless to sleep, answered. "On the first ring. It's a boy," James announced without preamble. "Jonathan Edward Westbrook, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Born at 11:42 p.m. Mother and child are both doing well." "A boy," Mason repeated, a smile spreading across his face. "That's wonderful news. Charlotte asked me to tell you she'll call tomorrow when she's had some rest." After hanging up, Mason went to check on Abby, who had finally fallen asleep around 10. He decided to let her sleep and share the news in the morning. Instead, he pulled on his coat and boots and walked out to the old maple tree, where the nearly full moon cast silver light across the frost-covered fields. Standing beneath those ancient branches, Mason offered a silent welcome to Jonathan Edward Westbrook, the newest connection to this land. He thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them all to this moment. His father's friendship with Edward Westbrook, Charlotte's inheritance, the chance breakdown of her Range Rover at his garage. Life rarely followed a straight path, Mason reflected. Sometimes the longest road led you right back home. The next morning, Mason broke the news to Abby over breakfast. Charlotte had her baby last night, a boy, Jonathan Edward. "A boy!" Abby exclaimed, nearly spilling her orange juice. "That's perfect. When can we meet him? Can we go to Boston? Or are they coming here right away?" "Slow down," Mason chuckled. "Charlotte and the baby need time to recover first, but she promised they'd visit as soon as they're able to travel." "We should get the East Wing ready," Abby decided, immediately shifting into planning mode. "Make sure it's super comfortable. For them, the contractors are starting the renovations today," Mason assured her. "It'll be ready by the time they visit." Later that afternoon, Charlotte called. She sounded tired but elated. "He's perfect, Mason. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a surprisingly full head of dark hair." "Congratulations," Mason said warmly. "James told us the good news." Abby's beside herself with excitement. "Is she there? Can I talk to her?" Mason handed the phone to his daughter, who immediately peppered Charlotte with questions about the baby. Charlotte answered patiently, promising pictures and a visit as soon as possible. When Abby finally returned the phone, Charlotte's tone grew more serious. "Mason, there's something I wanted to discuss with you about the baby's last name." "What?" "About it? James said it's Jonathan Edward Westbrook, right?" "That's what's on the birth certificate for now," Charlotte confirmed. "But I've been thinking, given everything, I'd like to honor the connection between our families. What would you think about Westbrook Taylor, or even just Taylor as his middle name?" The suggestion caught Mason by surprise. "Charlotte, that's a significant gesture. This partnership we've formed, this restoration of Willow Creek Farm, it's significant too," Charlotte said simply. "Jonathan is going to grow up knowing this land, knowing its history. It seems right that his name should reflect that." Mason felt a surge of emotion, gratitude mixed with a sense of responsibility. "I'm honored, truly. But whatever you decide about his name, he'll always have a connection to this place." "I know," Charlotte said softly. "That's why I was so determined to make this partnership work. I wanted him to have roots, to know where he comes from. Not just my side of his heritage, but the land itself, the legacy of those who cared for it." After they hung up, Mason sat on the porch swing, watching as the contractors unloaded supplies for the East Wing renovation. The partnership with Charlotte had started as a practical arrangement, a way to reclaim what he'd lost. But somewhere along the way, it had evolved into something more complex, a blending of families, of histories, of futures. Abby emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of hot cider. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing one to her father and settling beside him on the swing. What are you thinking about? You look serious." Mason smiled at his perceptive daughter, just reflecting on how much has changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, we were in our rental house, and I was fixing cars all day. Abby sipped her cider thoughtfully. "Do you miss it? The garage, I mean." "Not really," Mason admitted. "I was good at it, but it was never what I wanted." "This is what you wanted," Abby stated with certainty. "Being back here, farming again." "It is," Mason agreed, "though I never imagined it would happen this way." Abby swung her legs, making the swing sway gently. "I like Charlotte, and I bet little Jonathan will be nice too." "I'm sure he will be." "Dad?" Abby's tone turned hesitant. "Is Charlotte going to be like family now, because of the farm partnership and everything?" Mason considered the question carefully. "In a way, yes. We're connected now, through the farm, through history. So, Jonathan will be like, not exactly a brother, but not just a friend either. Something in between, maybe," Mason suggested. "A connection that doesn't have a simple name." Abby seemed satisfied with this answer. "I think that's nice, having more people who belong together." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the contractor's work and the afternoon sun slant across the fields, Mason reflected on his daughter's simple wisdom. People who belong together. That was what they were creating here, a new kind of belonging that honored the past while building something entirely new. The old maple tree stood sentinel at the edge of the eastern field, its bare branches etched against the autumn sky. It had witnessed 5 generations of tailors working this land. Now it would watch over a 6th generation, Abby growing into her heritage, and little Jonathan Edward finding his place in a legacy that was now inextricably linked with his own. Sometimes, Mason thought, the most unexpected detours led exactly where you were meant to be all along. The Vermont winter descended in earnest, wrapping Willow Creek Farm in a pristine blanket of white. Inside the farmhouse, warmth radiated from the newly installed wood stove, as Mason pored over seed catalogues and agricultural journals, planning the spring planting. Abby sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, carefully wrapping Christmas presents, while humming carols under her breath. 6 weeks had passed since Jonathan's birth. Charlotte sent daily photos and updates from Boston, tiny fists wrapped around her finger, dark eyes gazing curiously at the world, the gradual shift from newborn fragility to infant awareness. Mason found himself looking forward to these glimpses into her life, saving each image in a folder on his phone that was growing rapidly. "Dad, when are Charlotte and Jonathan coming?" Abby asked, struggling with a particularly unwieldy piece of wrapping paper. "Before Christmas," Mason shook his head. "After New Year's. Charlotte's doctor wants to wait until Jonathan is at least 8 weeks old before traveling." Abby couldn't hide her disappointment. "But I got them presents and everything." "We'll save them," Mason assured her, "or we could mail them to Boston." "No," Abby decided after a moment's thought. "I want to give them in person. It's more special. That way." The contractors had completed the East Wing renovations ahead of schedule, a minor miracle in rural construction. The space was now a self-contained suite with a bedroom, small sitting area, and private bathroom. Charlotte had provided input on the design remotely, but left the decorating largely to Mason and Abby, who had painted the walls a warm sage green and added touches that reflected the farm's natural surroundings. The phone rang, and Mason glanced at the caller ID. "It's Charlotte," he told Abby, who immediately dropped her wrapping project and scrambled to his side. "Hey," he answered, putting the call on speaker. "How are you holding up?" "Sleep-deprived but surviving," Charlotte replied, her voice warm despite the evident fatigue. "Jonathan has decided that 3 a.m. is the perfect time for deep conversations." Abby was the same way, Mason laughed. "Nocturnal from day one." "I was not," Abby protested. "Hi, Charlotte. Is Jonathan there? Can he hear me?" "He's right here," Charlotte confirmed. "Currently milk-drunk and about to nod off, but yes, he can hear you. Say hello to your friend Abby, little man." A soft cooing sound came through the speaker, causing Abby to break into a delighted grin. "He said hi back. I heard him." "He's becoming quite vocal," Charlotte agreed. "The pediatrician says he's developing right on schedule, which brings me to why I called." She paused. "I have news." "Everything okay?" Mason asked, suddenly concerned. "Better than okay," Charlotte assured him quickly. "We got clearance for travel sooner than expected. If the offer still stands, Jonathan and I would love to come to Willow Creek for Christmas." Abby let out a squeal of excitement. "Yes! Yes! Please come. I've been decorating everything and Dad got a huge tree from the north field and I'm making special cookies and—" "Abby, breathe," Mason interrupted, chuckling. He returned his attention to the phone. "Of course the offer stands. The East Wing is ready and waiting. When would you come?" "I was thinking about this weekend. That gives us a week before Christmas. James has offered to drive us up. He's concerned about me making the trip alone with an infant." "That's perfect," Mason agreed, feeling a surprising surge of anticipation. "We'll have everything ready." After they hung up, Abby launched into high gear, making lists of things that needed to be done before Charlotte and the baby arrived. "We need to get a crib set up and baby supplies and make sure the East Wing is super warm, because babies need to stay warm, and Charlotte's bringing everything Jonathan needs," Mason assured her. "But we can certainly make sure the space is welcoming." The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. Mason found himself inspecting and re-inspecting the East Wing, wanting everything to be perfect for Charlotte and her son. He told himself it was simply hospitality, ensuring the comfort of his business partner, but a small voice in the back of his mind suggested there might be more to his meticulous attention. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the landscape overnight. Mason woke early to clear the long driveway, while Abby bustled around the kitchen preparing a welcome meal of hearty vegetable soup and fresh bread. James's black Audi pulled up precisely at noon. Mason went out to meet them, watching as James emerged from the driver's side and moved to assist Charlotte from the back seat. She appeared, bundled in a camel-colored wool coat, cradling a blanket-wrapped bundle against her chest. Her face, framed by a soft red scarf, looked tired but radiant. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Mason said, suddenly feeling oddly formal. "How was the drive?" "Smooth sailing," Charlotte replied with a smile, "though I think Jonathan slept through most of Vermont's scenic wonders." James unloaded a surprising amount of luggage and baby equipment from the trunk, including what appeared to be a disassembled crib. "Where would you like these, Mason?" "I'll show you," Mason offered, relieving James of several bags. "Charlotte, Abby's waiting inside. She's been counting the minutes." As James and Mason transported the luggage to the East Wing, Charlotte entered the farmhouse, where Abby stood in the entryway, practically vibrating with excitement. "Is that him? Can I see him?" she whispered, eyes fixed on the bundle in Charlotte's arms. Charlotte carefully folded back the blanket to reveal Jonathan's sleeping face, rosebud lips, dark lashes against plump cheeks, a cap of thick black hair. "Jonathan, meet Abby," she said softly, "one of the most important people in your life." Abby's expression was one of pure wonder. "He's so tiny," she breathed, "and perfect." "Would you like to hold him once I get my coat off?" Charlotte asked. Abby nodded eagerly, leading Charlotte to the living room where the wood stove radiated comforting heat. Once settled on the sofa, Charlotte carefully transferred the sleeping baby to Abby's waiting arms, showing her how to support his head. That was how Mason found them when he returned, Abby cradling Jonathan with an expression of solemn responsibility, while Charlotte looked on with maternal pride. The scene triggered an unexpected tightness in his chest, a complex emotion he couldn't immediately identify. "James is heading back," Mason announced quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. He said to tell you he'll call tomorrow to check in. Charlotte nodded. He's been incredibly supportive. She glanced up at Mason, a question in her eyes. How does it feel, having a baby in the house again? Surreal, Mason admitted, but in a good way. Abby, completely enchanted by the infant, in her arms, didn't even look up. Dad, he's holding my finger. Look how strong he is. Sure enough, Jonathan had awakened and was gripping Abby's finger with surprising strength, his dark eyes, so like Charlotte's, gazing intently at his new friend. The rest of the day passed in a gentle haze of baby care and quiet conversation. Charlotte marveled at the farmhouse improvements, explored the East Wing with evident approval, and gratefully accepted the hearty soup Abby had prepared. By evening, she was visibly exhausted, and Mason insisted she and Jonathan retire early to recover from the journey. We have plenty of time to catch up, he assured her. You both need rest. Over the next few days, they settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Charlotte typically emerged from the East Wing mid-morning with Jonathan after his first feeding of the day. They would join Mason and Abby for breakfast, then spend the day in various configurations, sometimes all together in the living room, sometimes with Abby entertaining Jonathan while Charlotte and Mason discussed farm business, occasionally with Charlotte and Jonathan napping while the Taylors tended to outdoor chores. 4 days before Christmas, Mason returned from town with supplies to find Charlotte in the kitchen, Jonathan sleeping in a portable bassinet nearby. She was rolling out pie dough, flour dusting her cheeks and forehead. Abby mentioned apple pie is your favorite, Charlotte explained, noticing his surprised expression. I thought I'd make one as a small thank you for your hospitality. You don't need to thank us, Mason protested, setting down the grocery bags. This is your home too, remember. It's starting to feel that way, Charlotte admitted, her hands continuing their rhythmic motion with the rolling pin. More than I expected, actually. Mason began unpacking the groceries, sneaking glances at Charlotte as she worked. There was something deeply affecting about watching her in this domestic scene, so different from the polished architect he'd first met, yet somehow more authentic. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and one of his old flannel shirts she'd borrowed that morning when Jonathan had spit up on her sweater, and she hummed softly as she worked. I've been thinking, Charlotte said suddenly, about the coming year, about how to balance my work in Boston with all this. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the farmhouse, the land beyond the windows, the sleeping baby. And, Mason prompted, curious about her conclusions. I want to be here more than I initially planned, Charlotte said, meeting his eyes directly. My firm has agreed to let me work remotely 3 weeks out of 4, at least for the first year. I'd go to Boston for critical meetings and site visits, but otherwise. You'd be here, Mason finished, surprised by the leap of pleasure he felt at the prospect. Charlotte nodded. If that works for you and Abby, I know it's a significant change to what we discussed initially. I think it works very well, Mason assured her. The farm needs attention, especially in this first year of rehabilitation, and Abby would be thrilled to have you both here more. And you? Charlotte asked quietly. How would you feel about it? Mason considered the question seriously. I think it would be good for the partnership, for all of us. He found himself wanting to say more, but unsure exactly what words were trying to form. Jonathan saved him from further emotional exploration by waking with a demanding cry. Charlotte wiped her hands on a towel and moved to lift him from the bassinet. Someone's hungry, she observed, cradling him close. I'll be back to finish the pie in a bit. As she carried Jonathan to the privacy of the East Wing for feeding, Mason found himself staring at the half-finished pie, thinking about how quickly Charlotte and her son had become integrated into the rhythm of life at Willow Creek. It was as if they had always been meant to be there, filling spaces he hadn't fully realized were empty. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed the farm into a winter wonderland. Mason and Abby had established their own traditions over the years, a special dinner, opening one gift each before bed, leaving cookies for Santa, despite Abby's insistence that she was too old for that now. This year, they included Charlotte and Jonathan in every tradition, expanding and enriching each ritual with their presence. After dinner, they gathered in the living room where the tree Mason had cut from the north field towered in the corner. Adorned with a mix of store-bought ornaments and homemade decorations Abby had crafted at school, a fire crackled in the wood stove, and soft music played from the old radio Mason had repaired. "Time for the Christmas Eve gift," Abby announced, distributing carefully wrapped packages. "You go first, Charlotte." Charlotte, with Jonathan drowsing in her arms, accepted the gift with a touched smile. "This is unexpected. I didn't realize. This was part of your tradition." "It always has been," Abby confirmed. "Ever since I can remember, right, Dad?" Mason nodded, watching as Charlotte carefully shifted Jonathan to free one hand for unwrapping. Inside the package was a hand-knitted scarf in variegated shades of green, reminiscent of the Vermont hills in summer. "I made it myself," Abby said proudly. "Mrs. Harding helped with the hard parts. The green is supposed to match your eyes." Charlotte ran her fingers over the soft yarn, visibly moved. "It's beautiful, Abby, thank you. I'll treasure it." Mason's gift from Abby was a new leather-bound journal. "For planning the farm," she explained. Charlotte's gift to him was a vintage book on heritage apple varieties with specific notes on cultivars that might thrive in the Willow Creek orchard. "Your turn," Mason told Charlotte, handing her a small box. "This is from both of us." Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a maple leaf with a tiny emerald set at its center. "Turn it over," Mason instructed quietly. Charlotte did, revealing an engraving on the back. "Willow Creek Farm, Est, 1887, renewed 2024. "It's our way of saying you're part of this place now," Mason explained, suddenly nervous that the gift might seem too personal. "Part of its history." Charlotte's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Would you help me put it on?" Mason carefully fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through him, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Jonathan received more gifts than anyone, despite being far too young to appreciate them. Soft toys from Abby, a handcrafted mobile from Mason, featuring tiny wooden farm animals, and books about farm life that Charlotte promised to read to him as he grew. After the gifts were opened, they sat together watching the fire, Abby leaning against Mason's shoulder, Charlotte cradling Jonathan in the rocking chair Mason's grandfather had made decades ago. The moment felt suspended in time, peaceful, complete, in a way Mason hadn't experienced since before losing the farm. "This is nice," Abby murmured sleepily. "Having everyone here." "It is," Charlotte agreed, her voice equally soft. "Thank you both for including us in your Christmas." "You're family now," Abby stated simply, the words falling into the quiet room, with unexpected weight. "That's what Dad said, because of the farm and everything." Mason felt heat rise to his face, wondering when he'd said those exact words and how Abby had interpreted them. But Charlotte merely smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Over Abby's head. I'm honored to be considered family," she said quietly. "More than you know." Later, after Abby had gone to bed and Charlotte had taken Jonathan to the east wing, Mason sat alone by the fire, contemplating his daughter's words. Family. The term had slipped into their vocabulary so naturally, defining something that transcended their business partnership without quite capturing the evolving dynamic between them all. A soft sound made him look up. Charlotte stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick cardigan. "Jonathan's finally settled," she explained. "Mind if I join you?" Mason gestured to the space beside him on the sofa. "Couldn't sleep?" Too many thoughts, Charlotte admitted, curling up at the opposite end of the sofa, her feet tucked beneath her. It's been quite a year. That's an understatement, Mason agreed with a soft laugh. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the fire's dancing flames. I never thanked you properly, Charlotte said suddenly. For what? For helping me that day on the road, for showing me the farm, for agreeing to this partnership. She smiled wryly, for not thinking I was completely insane when I proposed it. Mason returned her smile. It did seem a little crazy at first. And now it feels like exactly what was supposed to happen, Mason admitted. Like all the pieces falling into place. Charlotte nodded, her fingers absently touching the maple leaf pendant at her throat. I feel that too. Like some larger force was at work. Our father's friendship, my grandfather's purchase of the farm, my inheritance, even my car breaking down at precisely your garage. Serendipity, Mason murmured, remembering Abby's words months ago. That's what my late wife would have called it. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Charlotte said gently. She was. Mason gazed into the fire, memories washing over him. She would have loved seeing Abby back on the farm. It was always our dream to raise her here. And now you are, Charlotte observed. In a roundabout way, you've fulfilled that dream. Mason nodded, then turned to face her directly. What about your dreams, Charlotte? Beyond the partnership, beyond honoring your grandfather's wishes, what do you want for yourself and Jonathan? Charlotte considered the question thoughtfully. Stability, she finally said. Roots, a sense of belonging that I never quite had growing up. She paused. And purpose. The knowledge that I'm building something meaningful. Something that will outlast me. The farm provides that, Mason acknowledged. It does, Charlotte agreed. But it's not just the land or the house, it's... She hesitated, searching for the right words. It's the connections, the community, the sense that Jonathan will grow up knowing exactly where he belongs in the world. As they continued talking into the night, the fire slowly dying to embers, Mason felt something shifting between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared values and complementary dreams. Their partnership, which had begun as a practical arrangement, was evolving into something far more meaningful. When Charlotte finally rose to check on Jonathan, she paused at the doorway. "Merry Christmas, Mason," she said softly. "I'm grateful for the unexpected turn my life has taken." "Merry Christmas, Charlotte," Mason replied. "So am I." Outside, snow continued to fall, adding fresh layers to the pristine blanket covering Willow Creek Farm. The old maple tree stood sentinel at the edge of the field, its branches collecting snowflakes, patient and enduring. Like the tree, the farm had withstood seasons of growth and dormancy, loss and renewal. Now it witnessed the beginning of a new chapter, a blending of families, a healing of old wounds, and perhaps, though neither Mason nor Charlotte was quite ready to name it, the tender beginnings of something more than partnership or friendship. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning, with Abby's excitement and Jonathan's first, albeit uncomprehended, holiday. Beyond that stretched a new year, filled with the hard work of restoration and growth, both for the land and for the people now bound to it. But for tonight, in the peaceful quiet of the snow-wrapped farmhouse, it was enough to recognize the gift they had all received, the chance to begin again, to build something lasting and true from the unexpected crossing of their paths. Spring arrived at Willow Creek Farm in a gentle progression of greening fields and budding trees. The winter had passed, with Charlotte and Jonathan spending more time at the farm than in Boston, their presence gradually transforming from novelty to necessity in the daily rhythm of life. Mason stood at the edge of the newly ploughed south field, clipboard in hand, mapping out the season's first plantings. In the distance, he could see Charlotte walking the perimeter of the apple orchard, Jonathan strapped to her chest in a carrier. At 8 months old, he was a curious, cheerful baby who seemed to thrive in the farm environment, his dark eyes tracking the movements of birds and his tiny hands reaching for leaves and grass whenever possible. The reconstruction of Willow Creek Farm had progressed steadily through the winter months. The farmhouse renovations were complete. The barn had been updated with modern equipment, and the first seedlings were already sprouting in the greenhouse Mason and Rick had built in February. The apple orchard, after intensive pruning and care, showed promise of a modest harvest in the fall. Most surprisingly to Mason, the business partnership with Charlotte had evolved into a harmony of complementary strengths. Her architectural background and eye for design had proven invaluable in the structural improvements, while his agricultural knowledge guided the revival of the land. They made decisions together, respecting each other's expertise, building something neither could have created alone. But it was the personal transformation that Mason found most profound. Abby was flourishing, excelling at school, forming deep friendships, and developing a special bond with Jonathan, who lit up whenever she entered a room. And Mason himself felt whole again, reconnected to the purpose that had defined generations of tailors before him. "You look contemplative," Charlotte observed, approaching Jonathan babbling happily in his carrier. "Second thoughts about the crop rotation," Mason smiled. "Just appreciating how far we've come. 1 year ago, I never would have imagined standing here again, planning a growing season. And I never would have imagined myself as a farm partner in Vermont," Charlotte added, adjusting Jonathan's sun hat. "Life takes unexpected turns." A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed across the fields together. After a moment, Charlotte spoke again, her voice carrying a hint of hesitation. "I've made a decision about Boston." Mason turned to her, concerned by her serious tone. "Everything okay with the firm?" "Better than okay." "They've offered me a partnership," Charlotte said, "but it would mean more time in Boston, more travel. I've decided to decline." "Charlotte, that's a major career opportunity." "Are you sure?" She nodded, her expression serene. "I'm going to open my own small practice here instead. Focus on local projects, sustainable design, the kind of work I can do while being present for Jonathan." She paused. "And for Willow Creek?" Mason studied her face, searching for any sign of regret. "You won't miss the prestige, the big urban projects?" "I thought I might," Charlotte admitted, "but these past months have clarified what truly matters to me." Her hand went to the maple leaf pendant she still wore daily. "This is home now, for both of us." The simple declaration sent a warm current through Mason's chest. Home. The word carried weight and promise. "We're glad to hear it," he said softly. "All of us." That evening, after Jonathan had been put to bed in what had become his permanent nursery in the East Wing, and Abby had retreated to her room to call friends, Mason and Charlotte sat on the back porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking about our partnership agreement," Mason said, breaking the comfortable silence. Charlotte turned to him with raised eyebrows. "Having second thoughts?" "The opposite, actually." Mason took a deep breath. "I think we should amend it." "In what way?" Mason shifted to face her directly. "The agreement defines our business relationship perfectly, but it doesn't address everything else that's developed." Color rose in Charlotte's cheeks as understanding dawned. "Everything else?" "The way we've become a family," Mason said simply. "You, me, Abby, Jonathan, the four of us. It happened so gradually, I didn't realize it until recently, but it's undeniable." Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. "When did you know?" "Last week, when Jonathan took his first steps, and he walked to me first, then to you, then to Abby, like it was the most natural thing in the world. His family, all in a row. Mason swallowed against the tightness in his throat. I watched you and Abby celebrating together, and I realized, this is it. This is what I want for all of us. Charlotte's eyes glistened in the fading light. What exactly are you proposing, Mason Taylor? With steady hands, Mason reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. A different kind of partnership. One that makes official what we've already become. He opened the box to reveal a vintage ring with a modest diamond flanked by emeralds that matched Charlotte's eyes. It was my grandmother's. My mother saved it for me, and I've kept it all these years, never expecting to find someone to give it to again. Charlotte's breath caught. Mason, I love you, Charlotte. Not just for what you've done for me and Abby, not just for giving us back the farm, but for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your practicality. He smiled. Even your stubbornness when you know you're right. Charlotte laughed softly, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I love Jonathan as if he were my own, Mason continued. And I know Abby feels the same way. We want to be a real family, legally, officially in every way that matters. Have you talked to Abby about this? Charlotte asked. Ever practical even in this emotional moment? Mason nodded. She's the one who suggested I use my grandmother's ring. Said it was about time. We made things official. Charlotte laughed again, wiping away tears. Smart girl. She gets that from her mother, Mason said. So, what do you say? Will you marry me, Charlotte Westbrook? Make this partnership permanent? Charlotte reached out to touch his face, her eyes shining with certainty. Yes. Absolutely yes. As they sealed the proposal with a kiss, the old maple tree stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, branches reaching skyward like weathered hands in prayer. It had witnessed 5 generations of Taylors working this land, had endured the 8-year absence, and now would watch over a new beginning, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and circumstance, by serendipity and second chances. Next morning, as dawn broke over Willow Creek Farm, Mason stood beneath that ancient maple, coffee in hand, watching the sun illuminate the fields that once again belonged to his family, a family expanded and enriched by the most unexpected of journeys. Abby burst out the back door, still in pajamas, Jonathan toddling behind her with Charlotte following closely. Dad? Can we tell Mrs. Harding today, and Pastor Wilson and everybody? Slow down, Mason laughed. Let's have breakfast first. As they gathered at the kitchen table, Mason and Charlotte, Abby and Jonathan, the farmhouse seemed to embrace them, its walls containing not just their present joy, but echoes of all that had come before. The struggles and losses that had led them here, the chance encounters that had changed everything, the courage it had taken to trust in new beginnings. Outside, spring continued its quiet transformation of Willow Creek Farm. The apple trees blossomed, in delicate white and pink, promising fruit for the autumn harvest. New crops pushed through the rich soil toward the sun. The creek that gave the farm its name flowed clear and steady, its ancient rhythm unchanged by the years of absence. All was as it should be. Mason Taylor had come home. And in finding his way back to Willow Creek Farm, he had discovered something even more precious than his family's legacy. He had found a new family to share it with, roots intertwining to create something stronger than either could have built. Alone, sometimes the most unexpected detours lead exactly where you're meant to be all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.